I would like to call this meeting to order. Any disclosure of interest? Item 3, we are fortunate to have a new appointment to the Police Services Board. Carol, welcome to the Police Services Board. I was wondering if you could take a moment just to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you become a member of the Police Services Board.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Carol Greentree. I understand I'm filling some big shoes, and Dave Douglas has been a good member of this committee for a very long time. So I know I have some work to do. My name, I am a supervisor with the Norfolk Association for Community Living. It's an organization that supports the inclusion of people with disabilities in all aspects of community life. In my other community work, I have been with the Simcoe Community Policing Committee since 2011, and I've done a lot of work in policing that way.
Well, wonderful. And as I understand it, you've been through Citizens Academy as well?
I have, and that is how I became involved in the Community Policing Committee. I was in the inaugural class. Well,
wonderful. And I'm glad that you were able to keep Ed on the straight and narrow, so that's excellent. Well, yes. Welcome to the Police Services Board.
Thank you.
Minutes of October 25th. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, if I could have a motion to adopt. Moved by Dave Murphy, seconded by Jim Oliver. All in favor? There is some business arising. There were some questions overhanging from the billing statement from last month, one of which was Assist Public, which was up markedly over the whole entire 5-year period. There was some explanation given at the last meeting. Inspector, was there anything else to follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up in response to that question that came up, we did complete a review of those calls for service, and of the ones reviewed, all required some level of police response. There were certainly a few that could have been cleared as something else, as an example on animal complaints and things of that nature, but there was nothing obvious that was noted to indicate the reason for this increase in 2016. So again, all those calls for service as being billable did require some level of police response.
Any questions on that? Go ahead, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm always wondering whether I should ask questions, I guess questions pertaining to the minutes would come from business arising, correct? Mm-hmm. I'm in order? Okay. Having been away in sunny Florida when this meeting took place, I was thinking about you people. Yeah. I can't believe Douglas told Carol that she has big shoes to fill. I'm surprised he said that. He's usually a pretty humble guy. Anyhow, I really wanted to say two things on page 5, if I may, Mr. Chair, and I do have a question. First of all, I want to say how impressed I am that when I have a concern about speeding or something, and I think probably other members will agree with me, I don't know, I really like the fact that when I Mr. Chair emailed the concern right away to Joe or John or whomever, Sean, whomever, it just is not ignored. It's followed through with. And same as direction from the board when we have concerns. That's my first point. The second one is when I look through the number of these areas here that they have reported back on, thank you very much, I wanted to just say that Highway 24, Brant County, Simcoe, the second one down, I notice, wow, 243 charges. Be fair to say that this is one of our top hotspots or top areas of concern in speeding is Highway 24 north of Simcoe on up into Brant. I just wonder if I could get a comment on that because everything else seems to be sort of, you know, not of this amount, I guess is what I'm saying.
I'd be pleased to answer that question. So with respect to Highway 24 being a provincial highway, given that it's identified as one of our big four for the Highway Safety Division, one of our concerns. We're fortunate to reach out to the Highway Safety Division within West Region, and what happens on select occasions, if we're able to flood that area with enforcement officers, not just someone who might be assigned from this county, but also those members who will work out of London and out of the Highway Safety Division. So what typically happens is you have an increased officer presence. Each one of those officers are dealing with enforcement activities at the time. So that's why this number of charges are so high.
That makes sense. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
And just as a point of clarity on that, I notice on the Focus Patrol it goes to December 31st, so it's going to be an open file until at least December 31st?
Yes, that's correct. So what has taken place, there's been a review of a number of priority locations, including collision data, the analysis of collision data, and this was one of the areas of concern that were identified in the region. So we're able to identify Focus Patrol for Highway Safety Division in that area, and it will continue to the end of the year, and it will be revisited for 2018.
Okay. We still had some follow-up questions on the billing statement. There was another question, which was whether opioid use should be a separate category under drug use. Inspector?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So I did follow up with our Statistics and Predictive Analysis Unit, and I can confirm acknowledgement that the Canadian Centre for Justice Statistics is adding 4 new UCR categories effective 1st of January 2018 in relation to opioid use.
Okay, well, thank you for your comment, Jim, because it looks as if that's the way it's going to be. So, there was a third thing, which was a question under the Mental Health Act, whether there was any way to explain the discrepancy between the 12 hours we were seeing on the billing statement and the hours that we were seeing on page 68 of last month's report. Was there any reconciliation possible for that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we did have a look. As everybody is aware, the time standard or weighted time is a provincially calculated time, and that was calculated at 3.2 in 2017. The detachment calculation itself is based on actual time, so time we spent on a call. So in 2016, there's approximately 6 hours per call. That difference is not billable, so that difference is to the benefit of the county. However, again, that's based on actual calls for service versus the provincially weighted time. So that includes time doing the paperwork, dealing with the actual call, and any time that may be spent in the hospital awaiting for doctor care.
So would it be fair to say that we investigate them more thoroughly, or just that there's more time spent on them?
It could be a number of things. If you look at the number of hours spent, the average hours spent in 2017, it's about 4.5 hours, which is much closer to that weighted time. So in 2016, I can't say for sure whether there was agreement in place for turnover of a person in crisis to the hospital or not. Sometimes the amount of time could be considerable depending on how busy the hospital is.
And are mental health crisis workers included in our calculation of hours?
I don't believe so.
No.
Okay. So I don't believe they are, and Joe's saying they work alongside our officers, and they keep their own time.
They're paid by the LIN, so.
Yes.
Okay, no, I was wondering that, and I think there was, yeah, sir, go ahead, Jim.
Before you go off that topic, I know in many instances there are 2 officers that respond to a mental health call if it involves going to the hospital and that sort of thing. So is that included in the total hours, or does each officer, in a sense, record 4.5 or 6.2 or whatever it is? Am I right, first of all, in assuming that there often are 2 officers that respond to a mental health call, and secondly, are their hours aggregated in that stat that you gave us?
So you're correct. There would be likely more than one officer
Yes.
that attends that call. That question specifically, whether it's included or it's separate, I don't know for sure. Yeah, but I would have to make some inquiries on that specific.
Would you like it followed up on?
Mr. Chairman, in that if you, again, use the 2016 stat that the inspector gave us, it was essentially double the provincial, quote, average, and it would be of interest, I think, to drill down a little further and perhaps find out how or why, and that would be one possible explanation. So if it doesn't involve too much time, it would be of interest.
Okay, there was one more question with respect to the billing statement, and that was, as I understand it, it takes 12 hours for an investigation of domestic violence versus 3.1 hours province-wide. Again, it's in our favor because we're billed for 3.1 when we could be spending much more than that. Is there some explanation why it's 3.1 province-wide and much longer investigation time here?
So that particular question was a little more difficult to identify because there's follow-up included. So it's not the initial call for service, but there's follow-up and additional because of the amount of administration involved as well. And that's probably why that number is as high as it is. Again, it's provincial weighted time, so we base our time on actual calls for service. So those calls actually are confirmed as a domestic occurrence.
Any other questions? I guess I'm wondering at this point whether we are in a position to have a motion accepting our billing statement for 2018, and we'll just carry forward as business arising Jim's question. So if I could have a motion approving the 2018 budget statement, moved by Dave, seconded by anybody? Charlie, all in favor? Thank you. Any further questions on that? Any other business arising that we haven't talked about? Seeing none, if we could move on to correspondence. We have an email from the OA PSB dated December 9th concerning renewal of our membership. And the cost of renewing our membership would be $2,847.08 plus HST for a total of $3217.20, and it has been put into our budget. So I'm wondering what the board's pleasure is of whether we renew or not. Charlie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps someone can just tell me the benefits of this. I'm sure there are many. I don't know. Obviously, you've done it in the past, so there's some benefits here. It's well worth being a member of the association.
I think it is beneficial to us as it is a go-to place for lobbying. The convention usually comes forward with new changes and practices of police worldwide that are beneficial to us. Certainly, one of the things that we'll get to later in the agenda is that board members are going to be required training, and that will probably be the source of training. So I think it's probably something that we should stick with. We've been getting a lot of good things from the convention attendance. We've been getting a lot of good summaries, and they have direct access to the ministry. So when we have something that's concerning, that we can talk to the
It's
OPSB.
an avenue, then, what you're saying, to address certain things.
Yeah, I think as a membership, it's probably something that we should carry on with.
Mr. Chair, I'll move that we renew the 2018 membership.
Seconded by Jim. Any other discussion? Jim?
Mr. Chairman, the only other comment I would make, I've only gone, I think, to one sort of the regional Group meeting, zone meetings, thank you. Yes, and I think Dave Murphy was at the meeting that I attended. This would be a couple of years ago, and I found it of interest as a board member. I know most detachments or police services within the zone have senior staff that typically attend them as well. And I remember the day I went, one of our senior officers went as well. And I guess I would just pose a question to Sean and Joe. If staff from the detachment are still attending the zone meetings, and do you find them of some value to yourselves as staff as well in attending, or what is the current status quo?
So I'd have to seek some clarification, because as far as my attendance, I would attend the OACP zone meetings, and I think what they do, correct me if I'm wrong, is they host those meetings together. So the morning is spent together, and then the afternoon those groups split off. I'd continue to attend the zone meetings. There are certainly benefits from a policing perspective. There's a number of updates we do get. So I would continue to attend. I don't know what happens in the OA PSB meeting for the afternoon portion. That I'm not sure.
And I remember the meeting I attended. I think we had to, for whatever reason, left at lunch after the combined session. So I can't speak with any authority in terms of the separated sessions, but I appreciate your comment.
Dave?
Mr. Chair, I'm actually first vice chair. I think I've only missed 2 meetings in all the years I've been on the board. The communication amongst both the police and the board at that first meeting is great. They bring up a lot of different topics that of interest, and then we do break off into our own sessions and discuss what's current and what's happening within the board on itself. So it is, yes, very, very valuable to have one of us attend at one point.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor, moved by Charlie, seconded by Jim, to renew our membership of the OAPSB. Any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you. As a follow-up to that, the convention is scheduled for the Wednesday to Saturday after the long weekend in May. That is a horrible week for me. It moves around a lot. I mean, it used to be almost faithfully the first weekend in May, and last year it was the last weekend in June. And this week, the first Wednesday is actually the PSB meeting in May. It would be nice to have representation at the convention because, well, I mean, training's going to come up for sure. Probably PSA amendments will come up as well, plus new practices. So if there are members who are interested and willing to go, it would probably be a good thing to have representation there. And more, yeah, Blue Mountain, yeah. No, they're just the second year in a row. I guess it was a big hit, so. So if you could look at your respective calendars and see whether it works or not. Usually the first day of Wednesday, which again is the PSB meeting, is a training day. And we don't get the agenda until closer to the time, but Maureen was anxious to book space because it fills up quickly. So I just thought I'd put that out there.
That's the 23rd, the Wednesday after.
Yes, the Wednesday to the Saturday, yeah. If we could move on to 6B, we have an email from Jim Oliver dated November 10th with respect to speed signage. And Jim, I guess the question is whether there was a response from Public Works regarding the efficiency of larger signs on Nelson Street. So
Not that I've had yet, Mr. Chairman. I appreciated Joe's, as Mayor Luke said earlier, a quick response when I emailed him about this, and I know we've done it elsewhere. I think Inspector Nash also gave us a sign an example from another community of a sign that's just a general, give your head a shake to motorists saying, you know, drive like your children live here or something to that effect, which I thought was quite effective, and maybe that's one we could also pursue. So I'm kind of still on it, Mr. Chairman, but I've not had a definitive response at this point.
So we'll just carry it forward and see whether we get a response from roads? Okay, if we could move on to 6C, which is the email from Jim Oliver with respect to Neighborhood Watch. Jim, do you want to talk to that one?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This would be educational for me as well. This quick email from Mike Cobb to myself, he knows I'm on the board. The neighborhood that he is referring to is up in the vicinity of Yeager Avenue and Blossom on the southwest part of Simcoe. And where we have, in that particular instance, it's just a group of neighbors on the street that have exchanged emails and sort of have each other's backs, so to speak, relative to anything suspicious occurring in the neighborhood that anyone becomes aware of, kind of thing. And so that, I think, tweaked his inquiry of me if I knew anything of neighborhood watch programs formally running within communities across Ontario. He cited Ottawa and London that I'm not familiar with. So I said I'd bring it forward to the board and ask if either board members or staff are aware of any formal programs existing in Ontario today where the province is assisting with neighborhood watch, or who takes the lead if they want to establish a more formal neighborhood watch type of program.
Inspector?
Mr. Chairman, so within the OPP, we do have a number of programs, what we refer to as community watch programs. That will include things like cottage watch, road watch. We do have neighborhood and rural watch. There are a number of programs that do exist. Within the county, we are in the process of establishing a community watch program down in the St. Williams area. We're meeting with a group of community representatives scheduled for next week in hopes of initiating some program down there. What we're finding is a lot of people, you know, the question comes to us, people are not familiar with what steps need to be taken. So what we typically do is we take a lead on the initiating the program, educate members of the community so they understand the role and the commitment involved in such a program. As long as those community members are committed and willing to participate, then they will continue to drive the program under our guidance, I guess. We'll answer the questions, we'll help them any way we can. So there are certainly opportunities. It depends on what their specific concern is and what their interests are in achieving, what that goal is. If it's just a matter of, you know, they're looking out for each other, they can continue to do so on an informal basis. If, you know, if there's a known concern in the area and they want to play a more active role, certainly we have our community policing committee meetings that they can participate in. At the same time, if they want to have something more formal, whether when they're out and about looking for problems or just having that visibility, those are things we can certainly discuss.
Go ahead, Jim.
So should we encourage these folks just to wait for a while until we've gotten our first one established in the St. Williams area, or if they would like to speak with OPP, should I be encouraging them to contact someone at the detachment and maybe initiate something parallel, kind of?
If there's a level of interest there, there's no harm in having them reach out to us,
okay,
and we can open up those discussions, take a look at what their specific needs are, and see if whether, you know, what the requirements are and what best suits those needs.
Okay.
And it may be as simple as people just want to be more involved in what's going on in the community. And certainly there are opportunities for that, and we'll do our best to figure out what that best fit is and point them in the right direction.
Okay. And would there be a particular contact name that I should refer them to, or?
Probably Ed Sanchuk
at
this point in time.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further comments? Go, Charlie.
Thanks. I too have been invited, Sean, it's next Wednesday, I believe, at 7 o'clock at St. Williams. I anticipate a full house at the community center. Certainly extend an invite to anybody here. For me, it's going to be a learning experience, as you say, about the process. And Jim, perhaps any neighbors that, you don't have to be from St. Williams to attend, but I'm looking forward to
Yeah,
that.
I'll find out from...
That evening, and again, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
That's a very good
but,
idea.
Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you, Jim, for following up on that. That's
Okay.
great. If we could move on to Bill 175, and I think I would like to jump to page 26. And I can see that it's fairly confusing, the amount of material that's in here. But if we could go to page 26, which is a précis of the Safer Ontario Act, which is Bill 175. The entire law, or the entire bill, is 450 pages, so I don't guarantee that we have all of the sections included here that are things that are going to directly affect us. But I've put a lot of major ones here that will affect us. And I mean, some of them, I think that your response can be, what does that mean? And we can have two sources of inquiry. One is through the OPP, who have a lot of sections that are putting through, what does that mean? Or we could go directly and write the minister and say, what are you trying to establish by this particular clause? And I would accept either direction from the board on these particular sections. And I think that in one section that I didn't put in, which was what the role of the ministry is. And as near as I can tell from section 2, it's to consult and advise. So I think that there's lots of cases where we can potentially say, thank you for consulting with us and thank you for your advice, but we're not doing this. So I think that is something that we can keep in the back of our mind as we go through this. But the first section, for example, is adequate and effective policing. And if we can go down to past to the section where it says in 2 brackets, adequate and effective policing does not include the enforcement of municipal or First Nations bylaws. And then we go on to the next clause, which is exceeding standards for greater certainty. Always love that phrase. A police services board or the commissioner may provide policing or other services that exceed the standards for adequate and effective policing, including providing enforcement of laws. And I guess I'll throw that open to the board because I don't know what it says. I don't know whether that means that it trumps the contract, whether it's different if you don't have a contract, whether there'll be a new pricing mechanism for bylaws, and given that we already have a contract that includes bylaw enforcement and includes them province-wide, I don't think that that can change. But I was surprised to see the wording like this. So I guess I'll throw that open and see if there are comments. Jim?
Mr. Chairman, that's why we've got you at the chair. You've got that critical, I won't say cynical mind, but I hadn't thought of the possible implications of a new pricing structure for exceeding adequate and effective policing. I mean, when I read that, I mean, I just read it on the surface. A board like ours is empowered with our local detachment to provide bylaw enforcement. And here in Norfolk County, we know we really rely on that during after hours and weekends, et cetera. But I hadn't thought about potential implications, so maybe
I think that's probably one section that we could divert to the Municipal Policing Bureau that they could seek clarity on and report back to us. And they have forewarned us that it's going to take a while. They have lots of sections that they don't know what they mean either. So, but I would be happy to put that on our question list. Oath of office, or I guess the next section, section 13, 1 and 2, I guess, again, it was a clarity thing for me. One of the initial aims of the changes of the Police Services Act was to provide the ability to use lower cost people for policing functions. And that means that there are cases where if special constables, because they cost less, are appropriate, that's great. At the time, there was a question whether Legionnaires could do some questions, and there was a question of supervision. And I think one thing that they've made clear in the withdrawal with the changes to the Act is that we won't be able to independently do that. If the board wants to, at some point in the future, say, well, we want more foot patrol in a particular area of the county and we think it should be by special constable, that we wouldn't be able to do that independently. But probably we can still do that as an enhancement. But the wording is unclear on that. The wording is such that it could require building a business case to the OPP that is required, and then proceeding to have it as an enhancement. And I think that was the type of thing that I thought was unclear, that I thought it was going to be easier, so that, you know, if it was appropriate to have a fraud squad of pimply-faced kids that were really good with computers, that would be doable. And I'm not sure that they have written it with clarity for that type of example. And so I guess I'm throwing that out, that we won't be allowed under this Act to have our 2 police forces, which with a definition that is somewhat sketchy, but it does appear that we would be able to hire special constables, but not on our own. It would have to be through a contract. So any comments on that? Okay, let's move on. Up to this point in time, Section 67, we are going to be a Section 67 board. Up to this point in time, we have been a Section 10 board. They haven't really provided a lot of clarity about the difference between Section 10 and Section 67. Other than they are planning to bring it out by regulation. So again, I think that there are questions about what the abilities of the board will be under Section 67. And under the current Section 10, it specifically states that we can choose our detachment commander. That statement hasn't been enshrined in the new bill. It is enshrined in our contract. So again, we're losing clarity on that type of thing. I suspect that we will still be able to do that, but again, it's going to be a regulation type thing about what the abilities of the board will be. So I guess that's another what's that mean question. So if we could go on to Section 70. Section 70 is a local action plan, and it's basically what we have in our agenda package. It is basically this being enshrined in law. And to the best of my ability, or best of my knowledge, we've done this for as long as I can remember. The format has changed somewhat, but going forward and putting it in law, I think the OPP would have done it anyway. But where it gets convoluted is, if we can go to page 29, no, go to page 30, which is the Municipal Community Safety and Well-Being Plan. And I've included in the agenda package a summary from another area, which was a test case. But this is being enshrined in law as well. And that is something that is new and is basically the same type of thing that we did when we went forward and put together our situation table. But this community safety plan appears to have a fair amount of redundancy with the action plan, which is happening anyway. And the ministry is saying that it's going to require a champion, and the champion will be a staff member of municipal council or county, and that it would require approximately 1,000 hours. So I'm not sure what your feelings are about that, whether it is a useful expenditure of time, because the end result of that is very similar in the plan that they gave us to things that we are already doing. We already have mental health crisis workers. We already have a situation table. The mental health crisis workers basically came because the board recognized that that was something good, and Zavanko was on the board of Canadian Mental Health and a very strong relationship with Nancy Candy Harding, who went to the LIN to get funding for it on a test basis, and then it became permanent funding. So that is how that happened. The situation table happened because of the conference, bringing it back of 2 examples of what happened in Scotland and what happened in Manitoba, and designing one that was suitable for Norfolk County with buy-in from all of the agencies. So where we are again is, I mean, I have a great fear that we're reinventing the wheel here, that we go forward, have this municipal community safety plan that we have to potentially file with the province, and only to gather dust somewhere when we are doing all these things already, and they're quite well enumerated in our detachment commander's action plan. So I'm not sure what your feelings are on this, whether, and I apologize for editorializing on it, but it is a big work commitment, and I don't know that it is the best use of resources. At least that would be my thought, but I thought I'd throw it out there. Charlie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I certainly appreciate the in-depth that you've gone into this. But back on page 16 of this report, or page 66 on the bottom right, I looked at the municipality of North Preston, who has an example in here they've placed of a community safety well-being plan. I'm sort of, I think you've said it, I don't have to reinvent the wheel here. I think, you know, there's probably many municipalities across the country that have such an animal, and if we had to, I can't see where it would take 1,000 hours unless you started from scratch. What are your thoughts? Like, and I guess if I may, Mr. Chair, Andy, through the chair to you, being a, put your clerk's hat on, we don't have a community safety planning of council at this point, do we? I'm not aware of one. We have certainly the emergency control group, et cetera, for emergencies, but we don't have anything like this that has been approved by council. You know I don't.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you would be correct. We do have the...
Say that again, I didn't hear that.
You're right, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
That's what I always say, but we do have the emergency management plans, but yeah.
And through the chair to you again, Andy, wouldn't something like this, that somebody's put a lot of work into this, wouldn't something like this be a starting point if we had to put one together? I mean, obviously I'd tweak it and adjust it, but wouldn't that be the way to go?
It could be. Usually we steal from other areas.
You steal all the time. I'm glad you admitted to it. Yes. Okay, Mr. Chair, that's sort of my thoughts here, is to, you know, if you wanted the county to come forward with this, we could look at several from other municipalities and bring something to council. Is that your thoughts, where we go here?
Well, to be truthful, I don't think it's worth the time, but
So what you're saying is forget it.
It is a legal obligation, at least the way they've written it, but
Yes.
the letter came to the board when I think more fittingly it should have come to Norfolk County, because they have the staff to be able to do that. But I mean, the point is that there's a fair amount of overlap with what we're already doing.
Sure is. Mr. Chair, if this board saw fit to pass this on to council, refer it over to council to have a look at. I think we'd be willing to look at it and decide what we want to do or whether we want to do it or what the legislation says. Would that be appropriate?
Go ahead, Jim.
Jim, you...
Mr. Chair, I was listening with interest to what Mayor Luke said, and I agree with him 100%. Here's one line at the tail end of a directive or summation coming from the ministry that we deal with as a board. I'm still puzzled as to what mandate that ministry has to direct municipal council to do something. I mean, we operate under the Municipal Act, and so I'm unclear from a logistical perspective how it would or should be turned over to the municipality without some more meat on the bone here of what it is we would have to do. I agree with Charlie. I think, according to this, it is our responsibility as council to see that this is done, with the caveat that you've suggested with maybe duplicating something that we already have, i.e. our OPP plan. But I'm just unclear, I guess, as to how would this board simply ask through a communication to the clerk or the mayor that council look into this, or
That's the one.
what would you envision?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, referring back to the bill where it says advise and consult, I don't know what the end result is. I mean, I don't know how it gets directed to council, and I don't know what the enforcement mechanism is if you don't do it.
Right.
And I mean, in terms of operating as a police services board, we certainly have a lot in our action plan. We certainly have the ability to consult, and it's certainly been enshrined in law that there will be even more consultation. So I guess my own thought is that it's not best use of resources when we have an awful lot of things that we would like to use resources for, but ultimately it will be a responsibility to for Norfolk County to either do or not do, or it's up to us to write the ministry and say, why are Section 68, 67 boards being required to do this when it's already being done? And I think that's one possible response, because I can see more need when you have a municipal police force and everything within. I can see more of a need for a place like Toronto to do something like that than I do for us, when I think that a lot of it is already being done and being based on relationships that have already been established. So not a lot of insight about how to handle it, but certainly we can, if there was a motion to put forward to say we don't really think that it's necessary, or that we should have our option to do it or not do it. Go ahead, Dave.
As usual, what some of the things I get from the Zone 4 meetings is exactly this, that our board over the years has been way ahead of the curve. Situation tables, data entry, and the province is just, and some other boards are just catching up. And I agree that I think it should be just kind of put on hold, because we are ahead of the curve, we're saving money. Because we're aggressive, we shouldn't be punished.
Jim?
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at, I guess on page 14 of our agenda, which is, I think, the basis under which this discussion has been going on, this release of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Planning Framework, and the reference there to the booklets. And more particularly, I'm looking now at this page 15, where it talks about the phases 1 and 2 resulted in the release of the ministry's first 2 booklets, one of which was Community Safety and Wellbeing in Ontario, a snapshot of local voices. I've not read those documents. I don't know that any of us have. I wonder if, before we take any real action, I'd like to understand a little bit more what that's all about. And could we maybe ask that that, and I guess we can all go ourselves on the website, but I always prefer to have something in my hand if I can. Could we get copies of that community safety and well-being document there, which might give us better insight into these community safety and well-being plans that Norfolk County is being told it shall produce and shall adopt by resolution of council, which is pretty formal.
Yeah, and that package is fairly lengthy, too.
I was afraid of that. Have you seen it online,
yeah,
I gather?
That's why
okay.
I only put
all right.
the example on, because
okay.
I thought there was a lot of verbiage there that
all right.
showed
So
you
I won't
through
ask.
it.
I'll retract that request. I guess maybe what you're asking us to do is to take the time to go online and look at it.
Well, not necessarily. My own thought is that I would like to be exempted from it, but
okay.
on behalf of Norfolk County, but I'm not sure that
right.
everybody else is
okay.
feeling that way. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm not siding with you. I'm not disagreeing at this point. This is relatively new. You know, and I started reading this and I went, well, I have to be sworn in. I have to be trained. I haven't done any of that, and I've been here a year or plus. So this is all new legislation. You know, under the Community Safety Act. My thoughts are this, very clearly, as Councillor or Jim pointed out, it just seems to be when I read through it, then all of a sudden the last paragraph, 287 or whatever, says, by resolution of council, this is, so it doesn't really say who is responsible. I read it that this is council's responsibility to provide this, not this board, and we can, Dave, you're quite right. We're probably ahead of many, and Jim's quite right, in my opinion, that I'd like to know a little bit more about this. But in the meantime, it doesn't hurt if this board so wishes to dump this off to our clerk and just say your comments and report back to our next board meeting or whenever to see, look into the legal part of this. And I don't want to do it just for the sake of doing it if we don't have to. But so I really think by the looks of that last clause in this act that's before us here, it's really a council issue for the community. I could be wrong. I don't know. That's the way I interpret it. Council, and not saying that it couldn't be put together by the detachment, by the police services board, and then pass it on for council to go through. But I just have a funny feeling that the onus is on the county. I could be wrong, Mr. Chair. Every municipal council shall prepare. Well, that's pretty clear, isn't it? Doesn't say, you know, Dave, maybe you want to put this together on behalf of council and save us some time, but it says council shall prepare and by resolution adopt a safety and well-being plan. That's pretty clear to me. Don't know. See what the board says.
Jim?
Mr. Chairman, I'm wondering maybe if you're looking for some direction from the board and in light of what Mayor Luke has just said, why don't we, and you can, I'll give you a resolution to this effect if you want, but that we refer Norfolk County, i.e. the clerk, to this section of this communique and encourage the county to make inquiries and determine what its responsibilities would be. I mean, there may be a terms of reference for these community safety plans somewhere that would be helpful. And I think that we are meeting our obligations as a board, I guess, if we raise the red flag for Norfolk County, as the mayor said, and pass it over to them. And that would be my resolution, that we inform Norfolk County's clerk of this requirement and encourage them to investigate further. I think that's all we can do.
Carol, do you want to?
You know, I agree with Jim, and I think that the wording is clear that it is council's responsibility.
Aren't you glad you came, Andy? I think that's reasonable. I mean, I figured the only action part for the board was whether to lobby to try and get rid of it, but they're very enshrined with it already. I mean, they're way down the road. So, but I personally think it's so redundant, at least for Norfolk, because we've got all these other relationships in place and our action plan in place, and quoting all of the action steps of this, and I was dearly coveting the 1,000 hours that they were saying that they were going to dedicate to it. So I think, Andy, if we can pass the buck, we'll do that. And I guess the only thing that we haven't talked about really is the training section. I mean the training section that came in, members have been complaining about training for as long as I can remember. And the training, there has been training provided by the OA PSB, which was situational, and it was fine. I mean, I didn't see anything wrong with it, but mostly the training issue was because a lot of municipal boards got into union negotiations, and that's what they wanted training for. But it has morphed into a different training, and they were totally outclassed. I mean, the members of the police unions were totally able to run trucks over them, and they still had to do union negotiations. So that's how it has come about. But if they are saying shall complete prescribed training with respect to human rights and systemic racism, as well as any other prescribed training within the prescribed period, and if it's not completed, then we're not able to set. I mean, I don't really have a personal problem with that, but Charlie, do you have?
Just a little trivia question. Does anyone know where North Preston is?
I had to look it up.
It's a suburb. It's east of Halifax.
There's a population of 4,000 people.
Oh, that's interesting.
Isn't that interesting? I just, 4,000 people, size of Victoria.
Okay, thank you. So any further discussion on, I think that we'll just ask for clarification on some of these sections and pass the big one over to Andy and Jim.
Mr. Chairman, even our discussion about the last one that we're going to pass over to Andy, I wonder, and maybe we're going to ask for further clarification anyways in our response back to that section as to, you know, does the province intend to provide terms of reference for these kinds of things? And from a legalistic perspective, how is it that one ministry that technically doesn't have jurisdiction over municipalities can dictate that a municipal council shall do something rather than it coming through the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, for example, the ministry that we typically deal with at the county?
Well, why don't we ask that question? I mean, we've got a bunch of other questions.
Yeah, well, I guess that's all I'm saying. Maybe you would, if you're willing, is to include that question. How is it that you feel, ministry, that you have jurisdiction to dictate that a municipal council shall do this?
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we've got lots of things that we'll have to ask and see what they come back with. I think, as the Municipal Policing Bureau has said, it probably won't be quick response, but that sounds like a reasonable question to me. Any other discussion on any part of the bill? Any question on the OPP action plan? Seeing none, if we could move on, we have a request to extend an agreement for the risk-driven tracking database. Inspector, I was wondering if you could just briefly summarize what that means for the board and
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may,